there, spooky friends, and welcome to another episode of the Scaryish podcast.
Woo!
I wanted to do that. Welcome to the opening of a bunch of annoying sounds. I'm Robin Grace, this is Adam Diaz,
Hello.
And today we're here to bring you folks a couple interesting topics. I already saw the first word on your script because you didn't move your screen. Adam, what are you going to be covering this week?
This week I'm going to be covering the Aurora UFO incident. So Aliens. Pretty excited to get back into the extraterrestrial stuff. Robin, what are you going to be covering this week?
I'm going to be covering the Borley Rectory, and I'm going to just get back into ghosts. When was the last time we had, like, a ghost?
It's been a while.
Yeah.
I'm very excited to learn what the word rectory means. So
You don't know what a rectory is?
I'm kidding. I know what a rectory means. It's your butthole. Okay.
Fuck, I hate you. I went to Catholic school, so that's,
All right. I've been to church before a couple of times. I haven't gone in a very long time. So.
I'll take you to church.
Wow. Okay, then. I think that means sex and stuff. I've heard that song.
I mean, that's what that song is about, right?
I think so. I haven't listened to the lyrics in a long time, so I usually mumble. It's like, take me to church, derp and derp, derp and derp. Anyways, so I'm going to go ahead and just jump feet first straight into our first topic. I don't think we have any conversation. We've been pretty boring this past week. Beat Resident Evil 8. That was pretty fun.
Oh, yeah.
Good game.
And if you folks didn't know, we do stream video games on Saturdays. So that's something if you folks wanted to join us, you could do.
And if you're upset that you didn't know that before and you're like, well, I wanted to watch.
The videos are up on YouTube.
.com/Scaryish and find those videos because they are saved there. So that is fun stuff. Aside from that, we watched Fear Street 1978, I think it is.
Yeah.
So they had the first one, which was 94.
94.
Then 1978. And then this Saturday, 1996, or 1666 comes out. They've been really good so far. I've really enjoyed them. So if you're looking for something like kind of campy, but also definitely horror elemental.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I was very surprised.
Yeah. I kind of equate it to Stranger Things. It definitely has the Stranger Things feel to it.
Has Stranger Things actors in it.
A couple of them do make their way over into that series as well. But there's definitely brutal fucking murders in it. So if that's what you're looking for, check that out. I've quite enjoyed that. So, but for this week, my topic, like I mentioned already, aliens. Heading back to the alien side of things, folks seem to like it. I absolutely love it. This is a close encounter that I've actually not heard of in the past, but I think it is fairly well known, especially to the folks who live where it took place or nearby. And it gives us an opportunity to put the extra in extraterrestrial. Woo!
Oh
Let's
my God.
fucking
Look at
do
the
this.
freaking, you turned the thing red.
I always turn the thing red. I turn the knob up to fucking 11, Robin. That's just the energy that I bring to the show.
You know what's funny is, for the past couple days, I lay in bed and I think, like, what if I got abducted by aliens right now? Would I remember?
The answer is no.
And the answer is no, but I lay there and I think, like, what if right now I just saw lights start pouring in the windows? You know what I mean? And the aliens.
That means you were abducted. That's why you're thinking of it.
Shut the fuck. No.
That's exactly what it
not.
means.
Get out.
That's exactly what it
No,
means.
it doesn't.
It's in your subconscious. It's starting to surface to your consciousness. And
No,
you're like,
it doesn't.
What if that happened? It's because it did happen and they erased it, but your subconscious hangs on to traces of it. I will say the aliens would take you, they test you, and they'd be like, just put this one back. She fucking forgets anything anyways. So no big deal. Just drop her off in her bed. She won't remember by morning.
So no wonder my butt hurts.
So, yep, that's it. Anyways, I present to you, dear listener, the Aurora UFO incident. And I know what you're thinking right now. Adam, why are you going so big for this topic? You're way over the top. Good question, dear listener. The answer to that is this particular incident takes place in Aurora, Texas. And everything's bigger in Texas. So I amped it the fuck up for the first 2 bullet points or so, and then my energy's going to come right back down.
Because it's 2:30.
It's 2:30 in the morning. Yep. So honestly, when I saw this topic, I was like, I am doing that. And I thought it was Aurora, Illinois. And I got really excited because that's really close to where I grew up. It's also the hometown of Wayne Campbell, a personal hero of mine and a direct parallel to myself. I don't know if you all know who Wayne Campbell is, but he is the host of a very popular cable access television program from the 90s called Wayne's World. And I sincerely feel like I'm kind of living his life. He found some hot Asian chick. I found some hot Asian chick.
Are you talking about the movie?
Wayne's World? Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Oh my God. Okay.
So, just saying, I got really excited and I'm like, Aurora, Texas, I'll still do it. Aurora, Texas sounds pretty cool. So that's where we're going to be talking about, Texas. And if you don't know where that is, it's about a half an hour or so northwest of Fort Worth, which is fairly close to where Robin once lived.
Yeah.
So it was going to be kind of a hometown thing for one of us, one way or the other. And I took it because I thought it would be for me, and it turns out it would have been for Robin. So
well, I mean, yeah. I mean, I didn't live in Fort Worth, so
you lived near DFW
I lived near
area.
it. Yeah, I lived in the DFW area, but
Right
yeah.
on. So this incident I'm about to tell you about takes place in 1897. Y'all remember 1897, right? The first ever Boston Marathon was run in 1897. It had a whopping 15 people enter. It averages 30,000 nowadays, so it's definitely become slightly more popular.
Do you have to finish that?
I don't think so. Pretty sure DNF stands for did not finish for the folks who don't make it to the end of the line.
Do you get anything?
Probably not. Just a fucking... I would imagine you get a piece of paper that covers your number that says DNF so you can walk home with your head hung in shame.
Oh, that's sad.
The first ever winner of the Boston Marathon did it in 2 hours, 55 minutes, and 10 seconds. The record for fastest time in the Boston Marathon was set in 2011, and it's 2 hours, 3 minutes, and 2 seconds. So human beings have come a long way since 1897 when it comes to running marathons, apparently. Mainly just the Kenyans are able to make their way over to our marathons now and just whoop everyone's asses because they're the best at
I love
long-distance
watching
running.
at the Olympics and stuff like that. People are fast.
Yeah, it's cool to see.
So fast.
So, what else happened back in 1897? Well, 19 zinc miners died of carbon monoxide poisoning at the Snaefell mine on the Isle of Man. Some Isle of Man history for you. Hopefully Sam will appreciate that. I saw it as one of the notable things from 1897. I was like, going in the fucking script. Also, William McKinley became the 25th president in March of 1897. That worked out pretty well for him. He wound up getting reelected to his second term, but of course, the second term means he aligned with that old Tecumseh curse and wound up getting shot to death.
Wait, what?
Yep, you remember the Tecumseh curse? Every 20 years?
You're gonna have to... Oh, what?
Every 20 years, the president that's elected either dies or has an assassination attempt on their life, and he was indeed assassinated. So...
Are we coming up on one of those?
2020. The 2020 election was the renewal of the Tecumseh curse, so that means Joseph Biden would fall into the Tecumseh curse. However,
what?
I will say... The George W. Bush presidency in 2000 had a not so notable assassination attempt where someone threw a grenade at him. I talked about this in the fucking episode. And of course, Robin is an etch-a-sketch, and she's already forgotten. The pin didn't get pulled properly on the grenade.
Wow.
So the Secret Service were able to jump on it, and the Secret Service agent did not have to sacrifice his life because the pin was still in the grenade. And then they arrested the dude and beat the shit out of him. So, and then of course, I'm pretty sure he was executed because they're in a different country when that happened. Doesn't matter. William McKinley, 25th president, 1897.
You're just blowing my mind here.
That's not all that happened in 1897, though. In the small town of Aurora, Texas, in the month of April, the locals noticed something odd in the sky on the day-to-day. It was an object that seemed to be flying, but they couldn't quite identify it. They all agreed they'd have to come up with a catchy name for an unidentified flying object, but none of them could quite figure out what that would be. It's a joke.
Oh.
You suck. Told you not to read my script.
I wasn't reading.
You're staring directly at it, so it's really hard for me to tell if you're reading
I don't
or
even
not.
know what you're talking about. Like,
stare at the audio sample. All right. So, anyways, it was odd that they saw something flying in the sky since the Wright brothers, they actually achieved their first test flight in 1903. So it hadn't happened. It wouldn't happen for another 6 years.
Wow.
It had this object had typically flown above the town when it was being sighted at very high altitude, but that all changed on April 17th, 1897. This unidentified object had lowered to an altitude on April 17th that seemed to be just above the town, and the townsfolk were able to make out the shape of it, comparing it to a cigar, just large enough to be a craft that they thought a pilot could fit within. The time was 6 a.m. when it was sighted over the town. Now, when I picture a UFO, I think of them in two specific states, either just floating and everyone's like, oh my God, look at it, or moving super fast because like the Air Force is chasing it and it's moving faster than they can and it just gets away. And then that footage gets released like 10 years later and they're just like, yeah, it's real. We don't know what it was. We've decided it's probably a weather balloon or some shit.
Right.
That's what I think of when I think of UFO. That is not what happened in this town. So the locals reported that the ship appeared to be moving at an estimated speed of 10 to 12 miles per hour over the town, traveling due north.
If you think about it, back then, That is fast.
I mean, not for aliens. I'd imagine that they were just cruising along in the sky. So 10 to 12 miles per hour seems pretty slow to me, unless the ship is having problems.
Oh, did you know that they call UFOs like something else now?
Yeah, I was the one that told you that.
Oh, were you the one?
Yep.
Are you sure it wasn't your mom?
I'm 100% sure. It's also recorded for posterity for anyone who listens to the podcast.
Because it's like aerial phenomenon or something now?
I can't remember. It's like UIT or something like that. And then I made a joke about how it's not as catchy as UFO.
Or UTI.
It's UTI, I'm pretty sure. So anyways, thank you for giving me back the information I gave you.
You're welcome.
All right. It's just funny because it was moving so slow. It's like you could literally run inside and like tell people in the house, like, there's a spaceship in the sky. Come outside. And someone could just like finish their breakfast and then like take a quick bathroom break before coming outside. And then they'd still see it putting along because it's moving so damn slow. As it continued on its northward course, it was losing altitude. So it was getting closer to the ground. As a side note, yeah, you can see where this is going. Ship losing altitude. I will also say, as a standard disclaimer, that this could all be bullshit, but this is from actual eyewitness accounts printed in 1897.
And it crashes.
It does crash. Witnesses stated that while traveling due north, it was, quote, much nearer the Earth than ever before. Evidently, some of the machinery was out of order, end quote.
How would you know?
I love that some tradesman is out at 6 a.m. watching a spaceship move slowly through the sky and is like, oh, some of the machinery must be out of order. Like, we fucking get it, bro. You know machines. Like, don't try and act like you know UFOs. It eventually reaches the north part of town and winds up on the homestead of Judge J.S. Proctor, which sounds like a judge's name.
Sounds like a fake name.
The craft attempted to pass over the judge's windmill on the property, but the nose of the craft was not able to clear the tower of the windmill and struck it. Upon striking the windmill tower, the craft, quote, went to pieces, end quote, and scattered debris over several acres of ground.
Was it that big?
It was big. In the collision, the windmill and the water tank of this windmill were wrecked, but the judge's flower garden was, quote, destroyed.
This poor judge.
That's an intergalactic fight on site there, buddy, if you ask me. Like, fuck up my garden, I'll fuck up your face. That's just the way it goes. So the impact...
We've been watching Letterkenny, and now you just got Letterkenny, like, dialogue in there again.
The impact was definitely the straw that broke the camel's back on this slow-moving ship, and after that, it came down across several acres, crashing into the ground. According to Charlie Stevens, who is the son of an Auroran at the time named Jim Stevens, who witnessed the crash, the collision set off a, quote, chain reaction explosion inside the craft. The lower right side of the spaceship started blowing up, quote, blowing to bits and pieces, unquote, over at least 2 to 3 acres upon the initial blast. So the bottom right of it essentially just blows the fuck up and shoots all this debris across a large area of land. And then it starts to have all these other smaller explosions within the craft as it plunges to Earth and eventually just collides and breaks apart. Aside from the ship being on fire, the falling debris and the windmill tower also apparently suffered from catching on fire and had to be put out. Other witnesses stated, by the way, there's like a million sources for this fucking thing. I had no idea how popular this was, how many times it had been investigated, like how many official reports were written about this stupid shit. I found a document, it was a PDF document that was a compilation of reports, official reports on this particular UFO incident, and it's 146 pages long. And it's like from the stuff that was written at the time to the first investigations, to the records for the property, to all the UFO investigations that would be done later, whether it be government or private, or just like nerdy podcasts, leading all the way up until 2020. So the range of stuff that I read tonight was from 1897 to 2020.
Dirty money, 20 to 20.
So other witnesses stated that they were able to observe the fire from the crash from as far as 3 miles away. So witnesses that stated like, oh yeah, I saw it burning, didn't know what it was, were up to 3 miles away at the time. Witnesses went to help the judge with putting out the fire. They're like, oh shit, the judge's place is on fire, let's go help. Gathering the debris and examining the wreckage. Here is what makes this particular story so very interesting. In the wreckage of the ship, according to the legend of the crash,
was there an alien?
Was a single alien pilot. The townsfolk gathered the body of the pilot from the crashed ship. He had been, quote, fucked up beyond belief,
what?
End quote. Not an actual quote. The pilot was killed in the crash. It stated that his body was clearly damaged. There was different verbiage used in different like investigations. It was like shredded. He he got the worst end of the crash, and he was not alive when they recovered him.
It's like a Roswell.
It's very much like Roswell. All these places call it the Texas Roswell.
Roswell, right?
Significantly earlier than Roswell, and I'll get to that in a little bit. The pilot is the biggest piece of debated material from the whole story. Okay, so descendants of witnesses state that some folks saw the pilot and some didn't. Those who didn't see the pilot sincerely do not believe that there was one. It is interesting, though, and I'll get to why that's interesting. People came from all over for the next few days. They heard there was a crash. They wanted to see what it was. Some of them collected pieces of debris as souvenirs and also to help clean the property. They're like, oh, yeah, we'll help get some shit off your lawn, basically, but I also like to take a piece of the spaceship with me. Here's the thing about the townsfolk, though. It's not like they roped off the area, decided to throw a celebration or a festival and call it, like, Texas's Roswell or some stupid shit like that and start charging admission.
It's not like Jeepers Creepers where they pin the thing up in the barn and then charge people to come and see it.
No, what happens is they see this. They're like, oh shit, that was nuts. Well, let's clean this shit up. And they start cleaning it up. It's a wreck. No one else is going to do it. They start cleaning. They retrieve the pilot. And according to legend, they went about gathering the debris and disposing of it. There was a well that they no longer used for water and was already being used to discard machinery that was no longer functioning and couldn't be fixed, or metal refuse like bicycles and other things of that nature. And they were chucking all this debris from the quote-unquote spaceship down the well. People would come by and check it out and help with the cleanup effort, taking home these souvenirs, and sooner or later this thing was cleaned up. As far as the pilot goes, though, it states in the newspaper that was actually published the same day that the body was retrieved and a funeral for it was going to be planned for the day after the crash and buried at high noon on April 18th, which it was. Those in attendance stated that the pilot was buried with, quote, Christian rites.
They gave an alien pilot
What else are you going to do with
rights.
it? They're like, let's bury it. They're all Christian, super Christian town. So they buried it the way they'd bury any of their own. They gave it a Christian ceremony. They read the last rites. Now, as to what the pilot was, it is believed to be of extraterrestrial origin for the sake of the story. There was a site I found that stated it was a short human, and that is because of a description that was given that was misquoted by other websites where they called it, quote, a little man, end quote. That's actually an abbreviated quote because the original quote was, quote, a little man from outer space, end quote. And that was given from an Army Signal Service officer who witnessed the event named T.J. Weems. Some places only quote this because they're basically trying to say, here's all the ways that it's been debunked. Because there's a lot of folks who basically go over this and say, it's all horseshit. So others say that at the time they were referring to him as a Martian, which was, by the way, the basic parlance of the times, is a term for like spaceman. Martian basically meant it came from outer space.
That's not PC anymore, right? Because they don't all come from Mars.
Exactly. They're not all the same. Plutonians are completely different than Martians. So, I mean, we know that now, right? But Martian didn't necessarily mean like it came from Mars. Martian meant it came from another planet. So when it comes to this particular extraterrestrial event, there is still a ton of skepticism. It was 1897, though. It is not like Roswell. It's not like it would be today if there was a UFO crash. The government shows up, confiscates everything, tells everyone to shut up or they'll disappear them or die. Will Smith sings some weird fucking song and then everyone leaves and it's like it never happened. In 1897, the government doesn't really hear about it aside from some media coverage in the newspapers that pick up the story and run with it around the country. And it's going to happen days after the fact and there's never going to be a follow-up on it. The local authorities are the only ones who deal with it, so the feds don't really have much that they can help with. The locals clean it up, they bury the pilot, and they just go back to their lives. But it is a very notable occurrence, and people are very interested. And as news begins to travel, more and more as time marches on, as people get more interested in UFOs and aliens and extraterrestrials, people outside the region start to decide they want to investigate the crash that happened in Aurora a little bit more. By the time it really starts to gain traction, a lot of time has passed. So have some of the original witnesses. They just passed away. So some of the investigations of the crash that happened from folks outside the community, they basically declare it a hoax pretty quickly upon doing a little bit of investigation, even though they don't have witnesses to interview. They don't have a lot of evidence to collect to state one way or the other. They're basically just like, oh, it just seems like it's fake.
Because no one took evidence before?
It just sounds to them like something that would be a hoax, basically. One of the most notable stories that shows up is that a former resident named Etta Pugues, or Pegues, not sure, stated that the author of the story, the person who wrote it in the newspaper, S.E. Hayden, fabricated the entire story. Etta, when she did the interview, was 86 years old. She was doing the interview with Time magazine and stated that it was faked, quote, to put Aurora on the map.
Did it work?
End quote. Not really. She said that the author, Hayden, was worried that the railroads that were being built had passed the town by, that if the railroads did not attach to the town, it would soon die. That is pretty weird. It's something I could see at the time, but here's the thing. There's a couple of things that make me skeptical about this. The first is that Etta was 3 years old when this happened. So it seems pretty insightful for someone who may or may not have literally been shitting their pants at the time, regardless of whether or not they saw a spaceship crash. I don't think I can even remember anything from when I was 3. So, like, the first-hand account from someone who was, like, 36 months old for me is a bit skeptical in and of itself.
The idea of railroads being built to pass a town and kind of screw up their economy.
No. It's not like it's being done deliberately. It's just it wasn't included, so people are now worried.
No, I know, but that happens all the time. Like when they started building new freeways or highways instead of Route 66, it happened to a whole bunch of towns.
I know. Let me keep going here. So, aside from the fact that she was very young, I look at that and say maybe she grew up and it's like the post-UFO crash, so she heard a lot about it, and somehow, one way or another, she sussed out this information and decided to sit on it until she was 86. Maybe. Although I'm not sure about the, fake the story because of the railroads thing, because this town is just north of literal Fort Worth, which is a very important military installation, which wasn't going to go anywhere. So this town has commerce in it, and it's not like it's going to evaporate just because the railroad's not there. It's been doing fine, and it was made before the railroads. So it's kind of this idea that they faked this entire thing. A single person faked the entire thing with just a made-up story in the newspaper, and there's absolutely no evidence of it. And it's like, it leaves out the evidence that was collected, it leaves out the other witnesses that actually spoke up, and the descendants that are still alive who state that their parents told them it did happen, or grandparents in some cases. So I feel like skeptics are so eager to dismiss something as fake that all it takes is for one person slightly connected to it to say like, oh, I think it's a hoax. And then like, it's completely a hoax. Like, don't look at any of the evidence. Let's not look at anything. And that's just shitty science. Like, that's just dumb. It's really lazy.
And then there's going to be the people that are just like, you guys are just alien enthusiasts and you want it to be true. And
obviously we want it to be true. The truth is out there.
But I just think when people say like, oh, it's all a hoax and stuff like that, it's just them trying to cover it up.
I don't know if it's them trying to cover it up, but it's them trying to prove that they're right. People go into a situation thinking that they already know the answer, and they look for evidence to support their answer. And as soon as they feel like they've been justified in any way, shape, or form, it's like, case closed, I was right. And it's really, really annoying. Another debunking came later where they basically gathered up all of the investigations, all of the things that were collected, all of the testimony from townsfolk, compiled it in a really nice document, and then basically stated that because one of them later on in 1980 stated that they think it was a hoax, it disregards everything else that they collected, which again is lazy. This same debunking also stated that the statement from T.J. Weems at the time, the Army Signal Service officer, who stated that it was a little man from outer space, was to be disregarded because the only T.J. Weems they could find was actually not an Army Signal Service officer, but was listed as the town blacksmith. So they confirmed he existed, confirmed he was a local blacksmith, and then decided it must be debunked. What he said can't be correct. There's no way it could be him because Army Signal Service officer is completely different from a blacksmith.
I can see that being like some messed up status type thing where it's like, why would we trust a blacksmith? Like you made him out to be like this army guy because we would never trust a blacksmith.
Well, here's the thing, is that folks from the town that were descendants kind of scoffed at this particular debunking because it was clear that whoever wrote it never had to carry more than one job in their lives at once. Because town folks had to carry several professions, and believe it or not, T.J. Weems was both an Army Signal Service officer and a blacksmith. You can be two things. It's kind of like how the guy in Centralia in like 1985 who owned and operated the gas station was also the fucking mayor of town.
I forgot about that.
You can be an official and still have a trade or have a job or a business. It's kind of stupid that people debunk shit by basically doing the laziest research ever. And if they would have dug a little bit deeper, they would have found that he was indeed both. After that, debunking came around stating that they couldn't find records that the judge ever owned a windmill. People, if you want to debunk a story, you don't pick such stupid details from the story and decide that if you can cast that detail in doubt, it somehow disproves it. That's just how lazy, stupid people think. If the windmill didn't exist, then maybe something else existed, a different structure that was hit, and they just called it a windmill for some reason. My friends used to record in a studio that we called the barn. The barn was neither a studio nor a barn.
Why?
It was like a pool house. We just called it the barn because it kind of looked like a barn.
Was
but
it that thing that you built?
No. If you listen to any of us talk about it, you'd think, oh, they recorded and hung out in an actual barn. It's like, no, it was essentially a residence that we hung out in, that we just took the top level, which was a loft, similar to what a barn has, but similar to what, homes also have, that's fully furnished, and it was a normal house. And they put an isolation studio in there to record in, and that's just a place that we went to because it was like on someone's property, but wasn't being lived in by anyone. It's similar to the idea of a windmill, but that doesn't change the fact that they decided, well, if we can confirm the windmill didn't exist, that means that the alien didn't exist, which makes no sense. Those two dots don't connect. And now I will talk to you about the mystery of the windmill that may or may not have been.
Okay.
So, not sure why they didn't just get the property records and check right away, but this debunking was debunked when UFO Hunters TV show went and found the base of a wooden water pump tower that would have been built at the base of the well so that people could pump water out of this windmill that probably existed on the property. They found a wooden water pump that would accompany it on the property, and they're like, this is almost certainly where it was. That finding was later disputed by a podcast called Monster Talk in 2020, and whatever individual on that podcast, I didn't care to read their stupid fucking thing or listen to their show.
Wow, rude.
I just didn't feel like diving into it deeper. That individual stated that the well that was found on the property was a bucket well, and it was likely constructed after 1940, so therefore, it's not the well. Therefore, the windmill didn't exist. And I'm like, these are just massive leaps in logic so you can sensationalize something and say, oh, look, I found the truth. It's also interesting because there's a man named Borley who actually bought the judge's property in 1945. He states there was absolutely a well on the property, and it's absolutely the well that people dump stuff in, because when he acquired the property, he had to clean out all the contents to try and use it for drinking water again. He did so, and he did reuse this as a water source. He stated that the water was contaminated from the wreckage of the crash, and consumption of it had led to him developing an extremely severe case of arthritis. So he never used it again. In fact, not only did he never use it, he decided no one else should ever use it, and he sealed the well with a concrete slab and built a structure on top of it. Per a different investigation from 2008, I think? This one also might be 2011 because they've checked this shit so many times. That slab was located under the said structure that was supposed to be there. It still exists. It had writing on it because people sometimes when you use concrete and do stuff like that, you write when it was done. That said it was constructed in 1957.
Wow.
I hate that there's so much debate about this well or this windmill. And also in 2008, UFO Hunters, a television show, went to the property and obtained permission from the owner, Tim Oates, who is Brawley Oates' grandson, who exists, who still owns the fucking property, to unseal the well, which existed, which they did unseal. So it does exist. It's really, really annoying how much people attach onto one detail and decide that that's somehow going to prove or not. Like, I want a smoking gun. Like, sometimes that just doesn't work.
Yeah.
And you're just not looking at a smoking gun. You're looking at some bullshit. Now, how about the elephant in the room here, okay? The alien. There was an alien that supposedly was buried. Well, when folks wanted to exhume it, when this started getting popular around the time of Roswell, and they went there, they were told by the residents and the officials of Aurora, Texas, basically to kick rocks. It's like, he was buried with Christian rites, so no, you cannot do that. You can't desecrate our cemetery, and that goes for anything in that cemetery. Stay the hell away from it.
Wow.
And they were very adamant that this was not going to happen. No one was going to dig up any of the graves in the cemetery. I've read that the headstone for the pilot was removed by the townsfolk so people would stop trying to get into the grave. I also read that the headstone was stolen by alien enthusiasts, basically. Not sure which one of those is real, but apparently it's an unmarked grave that is now like not known to where it might be. And
so it's lost to time.
It's lost deliberately so people will stay away from it. Some folks think that is a confirmation of the fact that it's a hoax. Like, you don't want us to dig it up because it doesn't actually exist. It's like, well, that doesn't mean they couldn't just toss bones into a grave and then put a headstone over it. But again, it's like the lack of evidence is not evidence. Like, it's like when you do a science experiment, it comes back as inconclusive. That means not sure one way or the other. Inconclusive isn't fucking proof, you know? So another important piece of evidence that folks tend to ignore is that a piece of the quote-unquote spaceship actually surfaced and was sent away to be tested. I've read the results on this test. Some of it's hard for me to decipher, but I was able to get to the conclusion section of it. They run it through the spectrometer, you know, you can see like what the materials are made out of and all that stuff. And it was very interesting to read through this. So there's some interesting findings here. The metal tested shows that the structure of the material appears to have been part of an explosion. The way they test this is words, science, words, matrices, something. But essentially they can determine based off of something's structure whether or not it's come into contact with high heat, which the sample did, and it also had a rapid melting stage, meaning it basically was exposed to super high heat very quickly.
Yeah.
And then they can also confirm whether or not it had a slow or a fast cooling stage.
Okay.
So like if you're tempering a sword,
yeah,
you know, you're exposed to high heat,
and then you like dip it
quenched.
in the thing.
Exactly. Yeah. They can determine that based off of the molecular structure of an object, and they were able to determine that it was exposed to high heat very rapidly. It did show that it appeared to be an explosion, and that it had a slow cooling stage, meaning it might have dropped into a field and then slowly cooled down to like room temperature, so to speak.
Okay.
Another finding was that it was mostly an aluminum alloy, which may disappoint you because that is something that we find here on Earth. One thing worth noting is that some of the places you find aluminum alloys here on Earth, even today, is in our aircrafts and our space shuttles because they're incredibly durable, they're good heat shields, and they're light. So the alloy, though, didn't have any copper in it whatsoever, which is present in commercial alloys basically on Earth since we started using aluminum alloys. They found it very, very odd. Also, if you have iron in it, you almost always have copper in your aluminum alloy, and this had iron and absolutely no copper, which they stated was just very, very odd. It's like, even if this is just a fucking hunk of metal someone found in a field and sent, then they're like, we don't know why anyone would ever make it like this. And if you're saying this is where it's from, yeah, it has some very odd properties to it. Also, the aluminum purity levels were significantly higher than normal, which means they were using far more aluminum than was typically used in it. And it was just a basically different composition of aluminum alloy than is used to being seen.
Maybe it was like some amateur person and that's why the ship didn't work. And maybe that's why it was really slow.
It's like this was the Wright brother. This is the third Wright brother who was like, oh, I'm going to show up those other two assholes.
I'm going to
and
make
then he
a
crashed
spaceship.
And he died. So this one is very difficult.
Was he incredibly short?
I don't know. This one is incredibly difficult. Like, what happened here? How do we tell what happened here? The only people that know what happened are all long dead. Anything else is just speculation based off their statements or the stories they passed down to folks who at this point might be 2 or 3 stories removed. Do we throw out a bunch of these statements that were made from the residents at the time it happened because one stated that it was all a hoax and it came from one person, despite the fact that a bunch of other people participated in this hoax? The one person calling it out as a hoax that was a descendant stated that it all came from one guy and didn't talk about how the rest of the town had anything to do with it?
It only takes one.
Do we decide to discredit the entire story because a well may or may not have existed, which it did exist, or because its structure may appear slightly too modern? Like stating like, oh, this looks like it was a wooden bucket-drawn well that was definitely constructed after 1940. It's like, well, not definitely. You didn't fucking test it, first of all. It's like, and second of all, like, that's just based off of what you found. So do we throw out the entire story? Because I feel like that is just the lazy way skeptics try and do stuff. I'm skeptical. I want proof. I just don't want lazy science. So who knows? We'll never know for sure whether this happened, but there are a lot of folks out there who absolutely believe this crash took place and that there was an alien. And others who think it absolutely did not. But me, personally, I think this is a clear case of a time traveler. and a spaceship that was capable of traveling through space and time.
It could be.
Maybe not a human one, but a time traveler nonetheless. When his ship started to malfunction, he picked a location, which was up in the sky, and a time, which was 1897, where if he crashed, it wouldn't be too impactful, especially since humans have such a dismissive disposition when it comes to things they don't understand.
Especially in that time period.
Yeah. Or
everything's new.
Or it didn't happen. But if it did, here's one thing that I really liked about this. Whoever the pilot was, it actually makes me happy to know that he was laid to rest with last rites.
They didn't just like chuck his body somewhere.
It's a very respectful way to handle something like that. And hopefully, I'm not the only person who thinks that that was the right thing to do. Hopefully the alien overlords who are probably listening right now also think, that was nice of you guys. And that, my spooky friends, is the Aurora UFO incident.
Nice. Yeah, I don't know how I feel about it having been so long ago and there's really no one to say anything about it anymore. That's kind of like how my topic's going to be, because the guy that really pushed for all this stuff is no longer alive, so it's kind of like fizzled out. But
I always talk about how when something happens in towns and areas and regions, immediately try and capitalize on, like, oh, we're going to have a Lizard Man of South Carolina festival like right now, you know, and they start selling merch and t-shirts and plushies and shit. I'm like, this is just sus. This is super sus. I just feel like everyone's just sort of jumping on the bandwagon. No one really thinks it's real. No one's going to try and find the thing because they all think it's fake. But when it's like, oh, well, this happened. Let's clean it up. Let's go about our daily lives and keep moving forward. Like, that to me seems like authentic 1897, what people would fucking do. It's like, you just move forward with your life. And when people are like, well, I want to dig up that alien in your cemetery, it's like, get the hell out of our town. Like, you're not doing that. You're not desecrating anything that we paid last rites to. Stay away from it. And that, to me, just sounds super authentic. So I think this one is plausible if I'm going to use Mythbusters terminology. But again, there's no way I can ever confirm something. Unless, aliens land and they're like, we have a fucking log of all the ships that crashed in your continent or on your world or whatever. And they'd be like, okay, let me check it. That's the only way I'd ever know.
That's hilarious.
Or maybe if I got a time machine, I could go back to that day and watch. But then maybe I find out when I get there, like, my time machine's malfunctioning and, oh shit, I'm the short alien the whole time.
You're too tall to be the short alien.
Who knew, so.
Man, remember, was it last year that had the Area 51 run thing? Was it last year?
I think it was 2 years ago.
Oh my god. Oh my goodness.
It was the We're Gonna Raid 20. We're gonna raid Area 51.
Interesting. All right. So before we get into the next topic, we are going to actually take a quick commercial break, and then we'll see you on the flip side. On the other side? Do people say flip side anymore?
Nope.
Oh, okay.
Just you.
Oh, okay.
Welcome to the flip side.
Okay, we're actually doing that. Okay.
I was making fun of you, but you just stared blankly at me, so.
Yeah, I was like, oh, he's actually doing it. Okay, so welcome to this side of the episode. I am not sure when the last time I covered a haunted anything. I've been really trying to steer away from true crime because I've done so much true crime lately. But I like ghosts, you know. Everyone likes talking about ghosts.
Ghosts tend to be a product of true crime, so it's just like the final stage of a true crime.
I certainly don't want actual ghosts in my life, so please don't haunt me. But I do enjoy a good ghost tale.
With how hot it's been in Vegas, I'm about to go buy a fucking Ouija board and start having seances to cool this house down.
Oh my god. We had thunderstorm or whatever for the first time in a really long time. And
tonight, while we were writing our scripts.
Yes, so it was like interesting because we actually turned off the lights in the office and we're just working. And I have a window in front of me, so I just saw like lightning go off every once in a while, and the rain pattering on the window really gives you vibes. But
I wished I would have been doing something besides UFOs. Like, it would have been better ambiance for a ghost story. So I was kind of jelly of you.
Yeah, so I enjoy tales of hauntings. And so that's what I'm going to be doing this week. I'm going to be talking about a haunting, and that's the haunting of the Borley Rectory. A rectory is like the place where the priests, reverends, all that stuff live in. You know that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I thought you were making a joke earlier that because you said like, oh, I don't know what a rectory is.
Well, I knew it was like backstage basically for like church services and stuff like that, but it's
where they live.
Yeah, it's sort of different because like I grew up in a place where like and we never called it the Rectory. Like the church was in one spot, and then there's a giant parking lot, and then the corner of the parking lot, like opposite the church, was a house. So we just called it like that's so and so's house. That's Father so and so's house. We're not that's the Rectory. It's just a fucking house.
Okay. So I went to Catholic school. So what ours was like there's the main church, and then you walk past the main church, and then there's a small building to the side that's the Rectory, and that's where the priests and stuff live. And then behind that was a Catholic school, which is where I went to school. But yeah, so I was used to walking past the Rectory every day. So this particular one is in a rural area of Essex in or near the east coast of England. And this building's history dates back to 1863. So there's bound to be some ghosts within its walls, or what used to be walls. And then there's supposedly some creepiness that dates back to the 14th century. And I say supposedly because of things. All right, so the land that the Rectory was built on has a long-standing history. Apparently, it used to be the site of a monastery in the 14th century. Supposedly, a monk, and that supposedly is just dripping, right? Supposedly, a monk from the monastery fell in love with a nun from a convent nearby. The two of them began an affair that was 100% not cool in the eyes of the church. The story continues that they get caught, and once their affair is discovered, the monk then gets hanged on the very spot that the Rectory gets built on, which is horrifying. But it's very typical of an urban legend.
Right.
Right?
I feel like with urban legends, locations are always related to some sort of horrific execution for someone who was just in love or wrongfully accused.
So it goes on. The legend has it that the nun was then bricked up alive within the walls of her convent. So this is the 1400s, right? So I do think that there's no way they would have bricked a nun up in the convent just for sleeping with a monk. You know what I mean?
Why wouldn't you just kick them out? Like,
right.
You broke your vows. You're no longer a nun.
Yes. To me, it would be like, you're no longer a nun. You're getting no support from us. You can leave, you know? I don't think they would brick a nun up in their convent. Who wants to hear that screaming until they die?
I mean, I know there's people out there and be like, oh, you have no idea what the church did. Yeah, I know, man.
Yeah, the church did some horrible shit.
I'm just saying, like, in this particular instance, it just seems like so much extra effort to do some horrible punishings. Yeah, and it's like the punishings are just supposed to get out.
It's just me not wanting that horrible of something to happen to anyone. You know what I mean? I'm just like, I have too much hope. I want people to be treated better. But it's probably where all this stuff is probably where the ghost stories surrounding the Borley Rectory began. And it has been proven false. This story of the monk and the nun has been proven false. But who doesn't love a good, horrifying love story, right? Everybody loves a good urban legend to tell, like, this happened and this is why it's haunted.
So you say it's been proven wrong.
Yeah, that not proven wrong, but false. Like, it didn't exist.
Okay.
Because there's no evidence that any of these people existed. So in 1863, a reverend named Henry Dawson Ellis Bull, which is such a long name, built this rectory. I mean, reverend is not his name, right? That's just the title. He built this rectory.
That would mean his name was Reverend.
Shut up. So he built this rectory where he and his family of 14 lived, which is a lot of people in one house. 14 people. Imagine 14 people in this house. It would drive me nuts.
Me too. 3 people in this house drives me nuts.
Shut up. But as soon as the Bulls settled into their home, strange things began happening. They would hear footsteps where they should, or when they shouldn't be, right? Bells rang on their own with no wires or anything attached to them. I assume because there's no electricity or anything to run notifications throughout the home, like Alexa or something. I imagine a string system with bells. So it's like you would ring, like pull a string
Like
and it
Mary
would ring.
Winchester had.
Yeah. And those bells are actually terrifying because when you're not paying attention, those are loud and horrific.
When you're not paying attention to the tour guide who says they're about to ring a bell, a loud bell ringing can be quite terrifying.
Well, if you're living in a house too, where you're like, there's no strings connected to that shit, why is it ringing? You know what I mean? And then just all of these things came together and just created these telltale signs of a haunting, right? All this stuff happens. You're like, my house is haunted. This is terrifying. And things also began moving on their own. The Bull children started seeing strange apparitions. There seemed to be a ghostly nun that would walk around the property. The ghost, this ghost was like one of those that they would see on several different occasions. Different members of the family would see this nun walking around. Ethel, the youngest daughter, was at one point even physically touched by some unseen force. So she would be pushed or sometimes slapped so hard that it would leave welts. I don't know if that's a cover up for some like parental abuse or something, but like that's really rough to see your kid getting hurt like that. And you're like, what? How is this happening? Another ghost witnessed by the family was that of a horse-drawn coach. It was led by two headless phantoms that would run through the area. So not just the phantoms, but the whole carriage would just go through. And when it comes to that kind of stuff, to me, I feel like it's that Wrinkle in Time stuff, because I don't think you could necessarily create the ghost of an entire carriage, because...
Why would the carriage be a ghost?
Right.
Why would the horses be a ghost?
Well, no, I think horses could be ghosts if they wanted to be. But like the
horses
carriage...
can be anything they want. They could be president if they want.
Does the carriage have a soul? You know what I mean?
Does a horse have a soul?
Yes, they do. You don't think a horse has a... You're going to hell.
I'm literally just asking questions here.
I think horses have souls. I think animals do. Because they do. Okay. But I just don't think a carriage could have, its spirit. But...
Wrinkle in Time makes more sense.
But you never know. We don't know. We don't know ghost science. Ghosts can be whatever they want to be, right? They
could be president if they wanted to.
But if you folks have been watching or listening to our show for a really long time, I've brought this theory up a couple different times now, a few different times now. And I just like the idea of events that echo through time. So maybe this place just had carriages coming in and out of it throughout history over time. And that's just something that's
maybe there's a traumatic carriage event where like one got loose and something bad happened. It was just so epic that it scarred the time, whatever.
Yeah. This ghostly horse-led carriage is said to have continued even after Henry Bull died in 1892. The home was then left to his son, Harry Bull, which is hilarious when you first read it. Because when I first read it, I had to go backtrack and be like, did I really read that right?
Tell me more about Harry Bull's house.
So Henry's death did nothing to abate the hauntings. They kept on. And there was one occasion when Harry was out in his garden. His dog was barking uncontrollably and was kind of hiding behind a tree or something. And to Harry, it seemed like there was no reason for his dog to be acting like this. So he went to go check and see what it could possibly be. And what he claimed to have seen was the specter of a headless body walking out from behind some bushes before boarding one of those ghostly coaches and then leaving. So to me, that made me think, okay, it's coming out of bushes because there used to be a house there, or there used to be a walkway there that led to where the carriages were. You know what I mean? Again, it's like one of those events that echo through time type things.
The headless horseman was trying to find his head and was
Shut up! You know what I mean?
Can't find it. I guess I'll board the carriage.
Whatever. But Harry and these coaches seem to kind of have run into each other often. And maybe Harry had
a routine.
A routine, yeah. So he may have had a routine where he kept passing these places each day at the same time or whatever. And maybe that's why he kept running into these things, because it's on a timetable of whatever magic. But these instances of him coming across these carriages would usually involve his just having them rush past him and then vanishing into thin air. So he wouldn't be the one to vanish into thin air. The carriage would.
It's nice that he's not getting assaulted since someone else is being shoved and all that other stuff.
Yeah. So the nun continued their haunting activities. So supposedly, this nun started appearing in broad daylight.
Just like in fucking Annabelle Creation. That part is so scary.
So scary. And then something that is just like out of a horror movie is that she would even start appearing in windows, peering into the home, which is scarier than peering out. Though
unless you're in
with it. But now I'm just thinking, like, would you rather have it in or out?
I love In and Out.
We just had In and Out the other day. Okay, so this nun peering into the home seemed to have disturbed the family to the point that Harry went to the trouble of blocking the dining room windows so that they could eat their meals in peace and be undisturbed by this entity that seemed to keep peering into the windows. I don't know about you, but that scares the fuck out of me. The idea of like this, I don't know what she looked like, but if she looked ghostly and terrifying and kept staring into the windows, and I'm just imagining the nun from the Conjuring movies, you know, or the nun. But, and that's what I imagine peering into the windows, and it just freaks me out. So Harry Bull passes away in 1927. After his death, the structure remains empty for just a little while until a Reverend Guy Eric Smith moves in with his wife. As soon as they move in, they started experiencing paranormal activity. And by paranormal activity, I don't mean he brought in a Ouija board and filmed himself while taunting the enemies or entities within the home before his wife ultimately kills him under the influence of evil. Spoilers, if you guys have not watched that movie, Paranormal Activity, yet, it's really old, and
that's on you.
That's on you.
That was the first one she spoiled, by the way.
Yeah. It's probably one of those movies that you have to have already seen if you're a fan of horror and are listening to this podcast.
I would be pretty surprised to hear if anyone out there hadn't seen the first Paranormal Activity but was listening to our show.
Yeah. But anyway, this new family, the Smiths, they start going through really weird stuff. They see the nun, they hear the footsteps, they hear the bells, and there was even reported ghostly whispering. They also experience ghost lights, and they see the carriages. One day, Smith's wife was cleaning out a cupboard and found a human skull wrapped in paper.
That's totally normal, though. Who doesn't have a few human skulls laying around their house?
A skeleton in their closet, one or two. Mr. Smith starts carrying around a stick for fear of actually running into a physical entity. Mr. and Mrs. Smith were both so unsettled by these goings-on that they reached out to a local newspaper called the Daily Mirror in 1929. Their whole goal of contacting this paper was to contact the Society for Psychical Research, or SPR. The newspaper then calls on Harry Price, who is, or was, a pretty famous British psychic researcher and author. I actually wanted to do a whole topic on him one day because there's a lot of things that he did that weren't so cool, and there were other things that he did that might have been cool. I don't know. So maybe one day I'll actually just do him as a topic. But as soon as Price shows up on the scene, he starts experiencing these weird things as well. If anything, they kind of seem to get worse upon his arrival. Price reports seeing objects fly through the air, thrown by some invisible force. What would seem like messages were tapped onto mirror surfaces. Price and his assistant even claimed to have witnessed a candlestick that hovered in the air above their heads and then proceeded to smash itself into the wall, sending candle shards everywhere. He, too, saw the nun and the coaches and their drivers, and supposedly even the ghost of Henry Bull himself. He supposedly even took a picture of an apparition. He supposedly took pictures of a few different things. There was one that I saw where it was a picture of the house later on, and there's a dark doorway. And within this dark doorway is a little white rectangle. And according to Price, that little white rectangle within that dark doorway is a picture of a levitating brick. Yeah. So, that being said, a number of these things that Price claims to have seen weren't witnessed by the Smith family. So he was saying, like, all this stuff happened, but the family that lived there were like, we haven't seen any of this. They would later come to doubt much of it had actually ever even happened. So the Smith family was like, maybe it's all bullshit. Maybe this is just stuff we made up with our heads in our minds.
Because they were scared or whatever.
Right. They eventually move out of the rectory in June 1929, less than a year after moving in. So they didn't stay there very long. Price's investigation was reported in the papers and put the Borley Rectory into the public eye. The report on June 17th, 1929 in the Daily Mirror reported, the rectory continues to receive, well, quote, the rectory continues to receive the unwelcome attention of hundreds of curious people, and at night the headlights of their cars may be seen for miles around. One enterprising firm even ran a motor coach to the rectory, inviting the public to come and see the Borley ghost, while cases of rowdyism were frequent.
Rowdyism, I like that.
End quote. So, yeah, so this guy came in, was like, all this scary stuff is happening, you guys gotta see it. And so it kind of makes this place a spectacle, right? I would have moved out of there too if this kept happening and I was trying to live there with my family, you know? After the Smiths came Reverend Lionel Algernon Foister.
Dang, that's a name.
He was the cousin of the original owner, Henry Bull. So Foister and his wife Marianne, as well as their adopted daughter Adelaide, moved in October of 1930. The hauntings didn't stop for them either. They experienced the thrown objects and all the strangeness. They also got the occasional window shattering on its own for no reason. Doors would lock themselves and lock people out of rooms. Furniture would move, things would disappear, and all the other strange sounds kept on bothering the Foisters. So what escalated with the Foisters is that there seemed to be something that was after Marianne, and not in a good way necessarily. So it was something that genuinely scared her. She too would be pushed, poked, and slapped. It seemed she would become the target for these thrown objects as well. One instance had her waking up in a dark room, seeming to be suffocated by some entity. There were also messages that would get written on the walls that said things like, quote, Marianne, please help get, end quote, or, quote, Marianne, light mass prayers, end quote. There's a whole bunch of pictures of different things that were written on the walls, and a lot of them are really indiscernible. Like, you can't read it. It's just a mess. And other times she claimed that she would be thrown from the bed or held down at other times. Foister attempted 2 separate exorcisms by himself, which neither of which worked. It seemed to only anger the entity because afterwards fist-sized stones were hurled at him. Not able to keep dealing with the poltergeist activity or anything, the Foisters moved out in 1935. Some try to connect the beginning of these scrawled messages, so the time that the messages started getting scrawled on the walls, they try to connect that to the beginning of when Marianne Foister started sleeping with this lodger there named Frank Peerless. But I don't know if that's just slut-shaming. People are just like, you were just making up shit. But
or someone who might have been jealous that was trying to scare them by painting stuff on the walls.
That being said, she has come forward to say that she used claims of supernatural phenomena to conceal her affair. So she would explain strange noises as the ghost.
Did you hear that ghost saying slap my ass last night? That was weird, right? Everyone heard that too?
You didn't hear that ghost saying harder, Daddy?
Wow.
But yeah, I just think it's really strange, you know, that would happen. It really puts the rest of everything you're saying into the trash. You're gonna do what you're gonna do.
There's just so many jokes about that.
So there were many paranormal researchers that were interested in the Rectory now. With the Foysters gone, Price decided to head back in with some new quote-unquote state-of-the-art ghost hunting equipment. And he recruited a group of 48 people to join him on this investigation. And for this particular investigation, he planned to live there for an entire year to get as much evidence as possible. And he really wanted to find ghosts. So, during that year-long stay, the crew claimed to have witnessed a slew of different events. One of these events included a seance that they held one evening. During the seance, their psychic medium named Helen Glanville supposedly made contact with a spirit that called itself Marie Lair, and the spirit claimed to have been a nun from France, and that she had left her convent to come to England and marry a wealthy man named Henry Waldegrace. And she continued to tell the tale of her being strangled by her husband and left to rot in the cellar of the Rectory. This spirit was supposedly trying to reach out to Marianne for help, which is why they kept finding the writing on the wall. Another spirit Glanville contacted was that of Sunex Amur, and this was a more sinister spirit, spouting on about how he would burn down the Rectory in 1938 and that the body of a murdered person would be found among the ashes. It just seems too on the nose, too much detail for me to believe, you know. But the team witnessed some poltergeist activity. They witnessed cold spots, unexplainable footprints in the snow, and other apparitions. The results of this investigation would then be compiled into 2 books. So one was called The Most Haunted House in England, which was published in 1940, and then The End of the Borley Rectory, published in 1946. So those are both published by Harry Price. He's the author of both of those. They're probably published by a different company, obviously. He's the author. More interesting still, in 1939, there was a fire under the watch of a Captain W.H. Gregson. He actually had dropped an oil lamp on February 27th, 1939, and the whole place went up in flames. It severely damaged the building. It pretty much gutted it entirely. We're going to post pictures on Instagram later that are going to have it. So I picked a picture that's like the house when it's nice, covered in greenery, things like that. And then it gutted. But in 1943, Price claims to have been snooping around the cellar after having revisited the Marianne wall writings. So he believed that they may have read, quote unquote, the well tank bottom me, or quote unquote, the well tank bothers me. He thought that the nun was a restless spirit who was trying to send a message and went investigating. He was digging below when he came across what seemed to be the charred remains of a young woman. Others doubted that they were human bones at all. Some sources say that it was the bones of a pig. A local vicar refused to give these bones a Christian burial, but a church nearby in nearby Liston did give it a burial. On May 29th, 1945, a small gathering watched as the bones were interred in a service officiated by a reverend named Alfred Clifford Henning. They had a photographer. They had Harry Price there. It was just this. They made this huge thing burying these bones, right? Weird things continued to occur in the area around the Rectory. Ghostly sounds of laughter could still be heard. There's the occasional mystery ghost light. Electrical equipment has the tendency to malfunction. The nun seems to be seen here and again by people. Even World War II soldiers that were operating in the area reported to have stones thrown at them from unseen entities. This strange activity continued until the burned remains of the building were completely demolished in 1944. So since then, reports of weird occurrences have kind of fizzled out. Price also died on March 29th, 1948. So there's really nobody to be adamant about what happened. You know, he wrote his books. He's not there anymore to be like, no, this happened. There's just people out there to tell the tale of what may have happened. Price's tales of fantastical ghosts and other reports that surround the Borley Rectory have come under understandable scrutiny and criticism because obviously even for us, we're like, it's really hard to believe a lot of this stuff. I myself am skeptical about the seances and the fire. It just seems too purposeful and too just like they set the fire on purpose.
Deliberately burning some. It seems very Tiger King to me.
Tiger King. Yeah, remember that from last year too.
Beginning of COVID started out with a bang. Everyone's like, oh, we're quarantined, huh? I guess we'll watch this crazy fucking show.
Oh God, that show. But yeah, to me, it just all seems too purposeful. And then Price finding the quote unquote body is just like the fact that there's no proof. No one actually went out of their way to be like, okay, who could this be? You know, he only found a couple bones. It wasn't like the whole entire body. So you never know.
There's like no investigation to find out whether or not someone was actually murdered.
Right. And they could have tested the bones. Or, I mean, they could go back and test the bones now if they wanted to, you know, and just checked. But, after Price's death, a reporter for the Daily came forward to say that Price actually faked it all, which I can see someone, not necessarily him having done that, but I can see someone wanting to do that for the fame and for the fortune, to sell books, do stuff like that. Like that one guy in The Haunting at Hill House.
So how does this guy know that he faked it? Was he a part of it, or is he just saying that he thinks he faked it?
He was somebody who worked with Price on the investigation. There have even been reports that everyone to stay in the Rectory were all hoaxers, so that they're saying that everybody from the Bull family was all just making shit up the entire time, which is sad. But you have to think, like, why would somebody in the 1800s need to say, you know, make up the fact that, like, my house has ghosts?
Yeah, it's like you make it up and then you move out immediately. Like, to zero fanfare, you don't get any sort of profit out of it.
Right. It's not like the Amityville Horror House where they made so much money off of that. Like, the Bull family did not make a lot of money off of.
The first family didn't make any money off of it. So
No. Yeah, but you guys know what happened. We made an episode on it. You guys can go back and listen to it. But yeah, so that is the story of the Borley Rectory. And it's filled with ghosts and sex and interesting things.
Indeed. The best stories always are. So good stuff, Robin. All right. I think that's just about everything we have for episode 187. If you have a story you would like to share with us or something that's happened to you, a friend, a family member, you can reach out to us by emailing storytime@scaryish.com or going to our website, scaryish.com, and clicking on Contact Us. Fill out that form. It comes directly to us. And you can also hit us up on our social medias. Facebook is facebook.com/ScarishPodcast. Twitter is @ScarishPod, and Instagram is @ScarishPodcast. Robin, for folks who would like to donate to us, how can they do so?
You can go to patreon.com/ScarishPodcast. Those are our monthly donation tiers. Tiers start at $1. At $1, you get ad-free episodes, which you can't go wrong with. And then we have one-time donations over on Ko-fi. So ko-fi.com/Scaryish Podcast / now. Scaryish Podcast. I don't know. Do people do / anymore?
No one ever does any other slash.
Okay, so yeah, so / Scaryish Podcast. And those are all one-time donations. All your donations just go to helping us upgrade our studio setup, kind of pay for things like hosting fees, website fees, things like that, and allow us to make more merch and spend more time doing stuff.
Indeed. Robin's a designing machine. She just sits down, gets an idea, starts sketching it out. The next thing you know, we have new Scaryish merch. So we'll see if that happens again in the near future. But it's always nice that when it does happen, we can get that stuff made so you wonderful folks can pre-order it and buy it when it releases.
Yeah.
Good stuff. So I think that's just about everything we have for this episode. So Robin, go ahead and sign us out.
Keep on creeping on, and we'll talk to you guys later.
Bye-bye.